Our next session is Redefining the Indo-Pak Narrative. Sharmeen Vachinoy is a two-time Academy Award and seven-time Emmy Award winner.
Yes. Yes.
Her films have changed laws, shaped global perceptions of Pakistan, and she's a Stanford alum as well. Please welcome Sharmeen Vachinoy.
Hello, everyone. Okay, now we have Sharmeen with us. Sharmeen is someone who has built an entire career telling stories to the world that it would rather shy away from. She's a two-time Academy Award winner. She's a recipient of multiple Emmy Awards, and she's also featured on Time's 100 Most Influential People. She's someone who She's someone who has shown us that cinema is not just art, it's power. And that's why today we're going to be asking a very simple question. What responsibility do storytellers have in shaping narratives about entire nations or even people on the other side of the border? I guess before we get into like more theoretical things, I want to start with something more human and more grounded. You've done a lot of work across many issues. For example, you've covered documentaries on honor killings and ISIL attack survivors. But one thread has been in common in particular, which is India-Pakistan. For example, you did the Home 1947 Partition Immersion exhibition, and you also started the Citizens of Archive of Pakistan. So I guess my first question would be, what makes Dosti so personal for you?
Hi, everyone. It's good to be back at Stanford. I was here 10 years ago. For those of you who don't know, this is my alma mater. I did a master's program here. I grew up around stories that my grandparents shared. All four sets of my grandparents migrated from India into Pakistan. And around the dinner table, there would always be conversations about what their home was like, the journey that they made from India into Pakistan. And one particular story of my Nani really stayed with me ever since I was a little girl. She described being 7 years old. My great-grandfather was a doctor, and she described that the night that they had to flee, it was a particularly dark night, and there was a lot of sound of mobs and violence. And my grandfather's compounder turned to my grandfather and said that, "Don't worry, Sabji, we will go together." They get onto the train, and they go through a particularly hard area where there's a mob, and there are people at the train and getting there. And a mob enters the train, and the compounder tells them that the family, which was my grandparents, were Hindus. And he basically saved their lives. And so I grew up listening to this story about how this incredible Hindu man, who I would never know, saved my grandparents and brought them across to Pakistan, risking his own life in the process. And that made me really think about the lives our grandparents led in one country, under mango trees, the secrets they shared, the homes they lived in, the friendships that they had. And I want all of you to close your eyes for a second, and I want you to think about your childhood home, the school you went to, your first childhood friend. And then open your eyes and really think about if you were never allowed to go back to that home, if you were never allowed to see those friends, if suddenly you woke up one morning and the friend that you had now become an enemy. If the streets that you grew up in were no longer yours, but they belonged to an enemy country. Can you imagine the trauma that we would carry? And so I really believe that Indians and Pakistanis carry a lot of generational trauma. And that generational trauma has never been unpacked. So when you think about the Holocaust and you think about what happened there, the partition was one of the largest mass migration the world has ever seen. But unlike unpacking the Holocaust, the partition has never really been unpacked. So we talk about partition, we talk about stories in homes, but institutionally, we don't address that. And that trauma, for me, is the trauma that is the basis of how we treat each other today and how each country treats each other. And so I started a nonprofit in my 20s called the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, because I've been really obsessed with partition ever since I was very, very young. And the goal of the Citizens Archive of Pakistan was to create an oral history repository. This is way before the 1947 archive was even started. In 2005, we began collecting oral histories. And now, after that, a lot of different archives had started. But the idea was that we preserve those stories, because in preserving those stories, we make people understand. And the generation that will never grow up with the kind of links that my grandparents did, and even my parents did, that we were one country at one point. And I think next year is the 80th anniversary of partition, and really it's the time to unpack that trauma, because out of that trauma will come healing, and we do need to heal. Both India and Pakistan need to heal, because overnight, when countries were divided and when lines were drawn, which were arbitrary, we never really processed that. And the fact that we could never really go back to the homes and have those conversations and spend time, and those smells that we were familiar with, we could never really go back to them. They stayed in memories, and in most cases, they died heartbroken. And so it's so important to be able to, and generational trauma carries from mother to child, and it continues to carry. So I strongly believe that part of the hate that comes is because we've never been able to unpack that.
Those are interesting points. We'll go back to them. And I agree. I think there's also a lot of unpacked trauma in regards to partition that needs to be addressed. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about this one educational project that you did under the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, Exchange for Change, where you had students from Lahore and Karachi and from Delhi and Mumbai exchange letters, photographs, postcards. It was like a cute little people-to-people collaboration, a really good example of track 2 diplomacy, which was probably the best example of track 2 diplomacy the two countries have seen so far. So, like, could you shed some light on why you started that and what you saw with that?
So much of my work has been about making sure that we see people as each other and not as the other. And in seeing people as each other, I thought about children. Children don't have hate. You know, hate is manufactured and sort of comes with the propaganda and sort of socializing. And so I thought about, if we get kids early enough, maybe we can change things. So I started this project with Citizens Archive of Pakistan called Exchange for Change. And at the heart of it was a simple belief that if we got enough children in India to write to enough children in Pakistan, and have conversations and exchange photographs, that in looking at the photographs, in having those letters exchanged and asking innocent questions, we would be able to perhaps open a little bit of a door in their minds to make them understand that essentially your street looks like my street, your mother looks like my mother, your food looks like my food, your festival might look slightly different from my festival, but really at the heart of it, family and community is there. And so we started small. We started with a few schools on either side of the border. It became quickly, galvanized. More schools started sort of signing up. And in the end, we had 5,000 children in 5 cities that were writing to each other. And if you read those letters, and I'm happy to share those letters, they're all available at the Citizens Archive of Pakistan's archive. They're such incredibly simple questions they ask each other, but in those framing of those questions, you begin to understand that even an 8 and a 9-year-old is beginning to see a child on the other side as the other. And so even at that young age, we've already been fed so much propaganda. So we have to, it is unpacking that and breaking that down that is extremely important. So while we may not physically be able to cross borders these days, I think it's really important to start programs like Exchange for Change, because technology allows us to do that now. We don't really need to see each other. We can start conversations from classroom to classroom. You need bold enough people to be able to do that. And Exchange for Change was a very successful program. Unfortunately, it had to be shut down because of the recent politics, but we hope to start it again.
Interesting. You see, you mentioned how when there's a lot of propaganda, it develops these perceptions and narratives in people, right? And it's difficult to reverse those, right? But like, how do we target the very root of those perceptions? Like, if you see cinema today, the films that mostly sell are usually the ones that are more dramatic. They're usually the ones framed in a very hero versus villain way, you know? And the more nuanced human perspectives are usually that don't really make it to the forefront, that don't get as much traction. So if the system is kind of rigged towards, not rigged, but if the system is kind of facilitating or prioritizing those kinds of movies, how can we have movies that are more about like dosti come forward instead of movies that are more about dushmani come forward, put simply?
I think it's as simple as getting funding. I think it's if you create an environment where you fund projects that have that as the ethos, then you create an appetite for that. But if you continuously fund projects that spew hate and then they do well on the box office because you have an entire sort of pipeline that is supporting that, then obviously that's what people are going to invest in. But it really takes just one person to say, my money is actually going to go towards creating a film that will show a storyline where we are the same, where there is friendship, where there might be a relationship where one is not a spy and a villain, one is not an army officer and a terrorist, but maybe there is a love story involved in it, maybe there is a friendship, maybe people travel to America and become friends and then come back to their homeland. I mean, there are so many stories to tell, but unfortunately, we don't have enough people backing those stories. I think so much of the work that I've been able to do when it comes to India-Pakistan is because I've had people who believed in those projects and funded them. If they hadn't, we wouldn't be able to do those projects. And I think that the same with film. You need one person to say, hey, I will fund that, and that'll move forward with it. So I think the stories exist. I think the desire exists. Not every filmmaker wants to make a film about hate, but the filmmaker who doesn't want to has to knock on 1,000 doors before they can get a little bit of funding. So if we make it easier for them, you'll see more films coming out. And I think beyond films, I think television is such a powerful medium. So one of the studies that was done recently about how much content, how much Pakistani content India consumes when it comes to television is enormous. So our television plays, because that's where we invest our money in and not in films, get consumed in so many households in India. And through those television shows, India sees a very different side of Pakistan, a progressive side of Pakistan. I remember being in a conversation with someone who said, I didn't realize that issues were almost the same. And it comes with, so television can play a huge role in making sure that people see each other's lives, because what propaganda has also been able to do very, very well is to suddenly show that Indians and Pakistanis are completely different from each other in some way, whereas absolutely not. How can they be? And so I think it's by looking at how the weddings take place or how the household interacts and how even something as mundane as how a mother-in-law treats a daughter-in-law. I mean, it's across the board in all of these shows. So you see that and you realize actually whatever issues they're facing, we're facing. And so I think that's where you will find some similarity taking place. And I do think the dramas have been able to change the way Indians see Pakistanis. And I think, of course, Pakistan consumes so much of Indian films. So while some Indian films carry the message of propaganda and hate against Pakistan, there's so many that talk about not specifically love for Pakistan, but have other stories that we consume. And in consuming those stories, we see a connection because we share a language and we share so much with that country. So I think it really just depends on what medium it is and who the people are. But I think that given the world that we live in today, propaganda is going to stop holding its own, because it's so easy to see. It's so easy to consume content. It's so easy to see things. Even when there was a ban put on Pakistani artists, people were still consuming it with a VPN. So you really cannot block this kind of stuff. I just think that we just need much more people to give towards creating films that have, gravitas at the heart of it. Film is really about changing the way people see each other, but it's also a way of touching people's hearts. And if you can do that with a beautiful story, then you know that no amount of propaganda can hold up against it.
Do you think there's a lot of demand for more dosti narratives? Like, do you think if someone were to create a film on a cross-border friendship, that would go as viral as many other films that have been going viral recently? Yeah.
I think that it would, and I think it's not just about going viral. It's about creating content that, creating a storyline with actors and actresses that move you. If a story moves you, absolutely, and you have the entire machinery behind you, yes, you will see that it will go viral. I strongly believe that, and I see that I feel that because Miss Marvel, when it came out, Miss Marvel is about a Pakistani Muslim from New Jersey, but her story is the Indian subcontinent story, and the number of girls that wrote to us from high schools across America to say thank you for our story, thank you for putting us on television, for making me feel cool about my culture. Like that, they didn't say, oh, this is about a Pakistani girl from New Jersey and I'm an Indian. It was about thank you for showing us. And I think that's after all, when you put something like that out, then it no longer becomes about borders. It becomes about how common things are and how people feel about that.
Do you think storytellers have to make trade-offs between wanting to communicate a real human story and to make people feel something versus wanting to make a film that is successful or one that gets the most traction, you could say?
I mean, I only make films that make people cry, so it's hard for me to say. But I think, when I go out and make, when I think about the characters or the storyline that I choose, I think about three things. I think about, is the person that I'm going to depict, whether it's a narrative, which I'm doing more now, or documentary film, is this story going to change the way people see themselves or see the community? Is this going to have an impact in some way? And once that film has been shown, what is going to be the sort of thinking that people are going to have around it? Like, are they going to be able to mobilize around it? Can they have conversations around it? Like, how do I move people on something? And if you can, in my experience, and I'm sure other filmmakers have if you can check those three boxes, you will get success, you will get accolades, you will win awards, and you will get traction. But if you go after those things, you'll never get them. So I think at the heart of them, you have to think about what you're creating and how much empathy that storyline is going to have, or how much people are going to fall in love with the characters you're creating.
From what I've seen, what narratives people inherit come from something that has been shown to them repeatedly, right? And mostly in this context, the narratives that are shown or the storytelling that is being done in a very hateful context. So how would you break that cycle?
So I think that information is consumed now from multiple levels, right? So TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, apart from the sort of stuff. So there's so much content on TikTok that's non-hating at all, okay? There's like so much content on Instagram that doesn't hate on each other. So maybe if the traditional bastions still hold on to those old world, you have an entire generation that's rejecting that, that's growing up now, that's watching content in which they're finding more similarities and less hate. Of course, there's a lot of people who are finding hate as well. But your access to information and access to all kinds of films, whether it's a village life in Thar or a village life in Punjab on one side or on the other side, you're beginning to see people dance to the same music. You're beginning to see people, sort of celebrating things. You're beginning to see each other without being told how to think about each other. And I think that's very important. When so much of what we consume is when we're told to think about something in a particular way. But when it's user-generated content, it's very free and flowing, and you get sort of those barriers come down in a lot of ways. And so I think because we're consuming content all the time in very many different ways, you'll find something that'll be viral and it'll get through. It's like years ago when Google did that ad about India and Pakistan, and you had this, this sort of love between the two of going back to partition, and sort of that ad went viral. It was all about friendship. So, content definitely, the love content definitely can get sort of across the board if you can find people who will actually make that content.
Yeah. Content creators have a lot of freedom to post whatever is on their mind. And as long as it's good, it does go viral. But how can we incentivize or create a system where storytellers have a greater incentive to create more, you could say, dosti narratives without making the trade-off?
Well, I get emails from sort of so many kids, graduating from college and then sort of just coming out in the world who are like, how do I become a filmmaker? And I just tell them that, like, you're growing up in a generation where you can become a filmmaker with your iPhone, and then you can publish your own work. And if you tell a great story, you'll find your own audience. And so it's about having enough young people wanting to tell those stories and creating those stories and putting it out there. You no longer have the barriers of entry that I did when I came 20 years ago in the film business. Everyone can be a filmmaker today, and it's about mass sort of content that is going to get produced. So I think if you sift through the noise that exists, you'll find that there is a lot of content that is talking about people coming together. I sort of strike that narrative down completely where it says that there's a lot more hate. Yes, the hate makes a lot of noise, sure, but there's a lot of love too. You just need to know how to find it.
On that point, how can we have the love make way more noise than the hate?
Okay, so next year is the 80th anniversary of partition, and the question we should all be asking ourselves is that, what are we going to do about that? How are we thinking about framing the year, next year? What are the conversations that we're going to be having about that? It's been 80 years. Is the next 80 years going to be like the last 80 years? Or are we going to change the narrative? Are we going to sort of flip the thing? So I'll tell you what I'm doing. And then I would love each one of you, when you go home, to think about the one thing you're each going to do in your lives, in your communities, that is going to reflect on how you will change the way people see themselves for the next 80 years. And this is upon each one of us. So sitting here and talking about love and hate, sitting here talking about them and what people are doing, it starts with us. It starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with everyone. What is each one of you doing in your lives that is going to break down the hate and make sure that the next generation doesn't fight as many wars as my generation did? So that's extremely important. So next year, I have set up an AI lab in Pakistan, which is an AI film lab, actually. And we are taking memories of people from 1947, and we are using AI to go back in time to recreate those memories, and creating vignettes that we will release next year as part of the 80 years. And the whole idea is to show people about that time and the feeling people had for each other. Because if we can capture the feeling in some way, then hopefully that can get transcended into the next generation.
Both India and Pakistan have a lot of censorship when it comes to media. And given that constraint, how do you redefine or you could say counter a narrative?
I think there's no country that has greater censorship than Iran. And Iran has done a beautiful job of circumventing that in film, circumventing that and telling really deep, important stories about their society. And so we just need to learn a thing or two from Iran, to be honest. Our filmmakers do. And so I think there are many ways to circumvent censorship and tell those beautiful stories. I don't see censorship as an obstacle at all. I just think that the obstacle is the desire. It's not the censorship.
Given that narratives are this powerful, who do you think bears the responsibility for redefining them or correcting them? Is it the audience? Like, should we be entertaining more of the good content, or is it the storytellers?
I think it's a two-way street. We have to create the content, but you need to show up. You need to support, you need to have hosting parties, you need to make sure that people are getting together to watch that work. I think that's extremely important. So I think the burden lies on both sides.
How is the audience going to watch something if it's not being screened? Because I'm assuming box offices probably want to screen the movies that are going to get them the most views, which are usually the ones which are more dramatic or the, again, hero versus villain narrative. So how can we get audiences to actually come across more of those three narratives naturally?
So I think the films exist. They're on YouTube. They're independent cinemas that are taking out films. They're on streaming platforms. There's so many. They're on television. There's so many ways. If you want to find something, you'll find it. Trust me. You just have to look for it. And I think maybe one thing to do is to create a repository of work that showcases those kind of stories, whether it's writing, whether it's films, whether it's sort of visual representation, whether it's art, and to create a repository where people can go to, which is online and free, and people can access. And maybe that's what needs to be done. And maybe I'll figure out a way to get someone to help me to make it.
As a closing note, if you could make one story about a cross-border story, what would the plot look like for that?
I've always dreamed of, actually I wanted to do this for next year, but unfortunately it hasn't been possible, but so I'll put it out in the world. I wanted to create 3 films on partition, one by a Pakistani filmmaker, one by an Indian filmmaker, one by a Bengali filmmaker. And I wanted to tell the same story from 3 perspectives. So you watch 3 films, but they're telling the same story from 3 different perspectives. Please don't steal this idea, because one day I will make it. But for now, I think that that's a beautiful way of coming together to tell a story that had many viewpoints, and to be able to tell it by 3 filmmakers, preferably 3 female filmmakers. Thank you, everyone.
Hopefully no one in the audience will be stealing that idea.
But you can fund that idea if you want. I'm totally open to that. Well, you can get in touch with me and we'll make it happen. Thank you.
Okay, now we will open the floor for the audience to ask questions.
Thank you so much. I think you've done a fantastic job of asking the questions. Well done, you, because there were some hard questions in there. I just have a quick reflection as something that is a personal experience I teach here. A lot of your questions were posed at how do we break the mold? How does good content, how does intellectually stimulating content get through the noise? I want to hear your perspective on it. What I have seen, it's the same as what we teach in Silicon Valley about entrepreneurship. You just have to be better. And acknowledging the fact that we live in a time where something as unintelligent as Dhurandhar will make a lot of box office thing. Essentially, it's not clever propaganda. It's really an unintelligent film. And what happens is, what initially I thought a great artist, or like he's a pretty good actor, that guy, whatever his name is, I've seen his other movies, like 83 and all, when the artists start selling themselves so easily, and bad content or this hateful narrative is so much easier to sell, I think one of your questions was, what does good content have to do? It just has to be twice as good or maybe 10 times as good. What do you think about that?
I think there's a superstructure in place to support films like that. And I think that there are audiences who have been sort of tailored to consume that. So there was an article very recently, I think it was in the Financial Times, about the changing of Bollywood. It went from love stories and went from stories that had family and whatever, and now become extremely political. So that's also the changing times of the world that we live in. I think that Bollywood is one of the most incredible film industries in the world, and I think that you'll find that then hopefully next year there'll be a film that'll be completely different, and it'll break the mold, and it'll tell a different kind of story, not in an India-Pakistan way or a Muslim-Hindu way, but in a love story way. I think the politics of our times is what feeds films like Dhurandhar. I think that once the politics change, I think the films will also change, because I have a lot of faith in Bollywood. I think that the storylines, the way that they've been, the 80s and 90s, and the stories they told, they were incredible. And so I really think that they will turn a corner, but they have a environment right now where this sells. And so when something sells, you create it.
Hey, Sharmeen. First of all, thanks for so many years of telling stories that have not only been great stories, but also have had impact on social norms and in some cases laws. Is there a story that you wanted to tell and decided not to? And what was the reason?
That I wanted to tell and didn't. I was actually supposed to be in Iran when the Green Revolution was happening many, many years ago for Channel 4 to do a film. And I was very sort of interested in going, and I wanted to tell that story. But at the very, very last minute, we were told that our crew, the crew was told that, we would get arrested upon landing. And so I wasn't able to tell that story. And I think that's been sort of one of my biggest regrets, being able to get into that country, especially given what's happening there now, and being able to really tell a story from the ground and experiencing such a beautiful country, and really hearing from the people. Because so much of the work that I've done over the last 22 years has been about people. And really, my films are not about governments, they're about people. And so it's always important to get in there. So that's sort of been one of my biggest regrets.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for such a great discussion. I've personally really enjoyed it. And my question about representation in film, in the film industry generally, I personally feel that the most important time for a person to see people who look like them having good representation and share good narratives on TV is as kids and as children. And while I do think that there has been a lot of improvements in the film industry generally in having these representations, I do think that the kids media is very much behind. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think this gap is real, and what does it take to, I guess, close that gap? Thank you.
I think the gap is enormous. And actually, for those of you who don't know, I created 3 animated feature films in Pakistan called Teen Bahadur, which were Pakistan's first animated feature films for children. And actually, I'm doing a project with Google right now, which is we're creating 10 films for children, looking at 10 stories from around the world. And so you'll be able to sort of see them by next year. But yes, there's a huge void. And it's because very few people fund children's television or children's programming. And even sort of big Sesame Street and that public broadcasting, sort of such big cuts in funding here. And And in my home country, there's very little funding, absolutely nothing. When I came up with the model for the animated feature film, I had to create the model to create that film. And so it's been very, very difficult. But if we can create content for children, I think, and we start them early, I think there'd be, I think AI is going to really help that, because with AI, if you can create children's content, cut down the costs, and then put them on platforms like YouTube, I think that would be really beneficial. So a lot of the work that the AI Lab is doing now with me is children's programming that we hope to put on platforms like YouTube.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to listen to you. A question about filmmaking. I don't know much about Pakistani cinema, but for Hindi cinema, my mother's generation and back in my youth, there were movies about the common problems of struggles of farmers, labor, water, social issues. Ankur, Nishant, Shyam Benegal's films, and Heer Ranjha, Raj Kapoor. All that disappeared, and it's mostly escapist cinema that I consume to escape the struggles I have as a privileged person. But that's why the manufactured outrage sells so well, because you need somebody to blame when you're not addressing those problems of inequity, health, education. That's why the politics supports and the funding supports the outraged escapist cinema rather than tackling. So filmmakers, why aren't you making cinema about struggles that are not the struggles of the privileged who need to escape, but the real struggles of masses that have disappeared from cinema? Is there any dialogue about that and conversations about that?
Well, in Pakistan there is, because fortunately or unfortunately, we have a very small film industry and very few films get made. So actually, we don't really create films that are centered around India and hate, because we get like 5 films get funded a year. So one film gets funded on a love story, one gets funded on poverty, one gets funded on something. We don't really have the money or the resources to fund all these films. So in a way, it's worked out well for us so far. So there's a big film out in Pakistan right now that came out on Eid, which is about a love story between 2 people who are poor, and they aspire to become wealthy, and like what they have to go through to become that. So it's really about living in poverty. And that's one of the biggest blockbuster hits in Pakistan right now. And in fact, it's playing here in the US as well. So our films are, we just don't have the capacity to create more films. But the ones that are being created, I'd say 70% of them are about the common man and are about the issues of the common man. Whether it's, even if it's a love story, it's an income inequality love story. If it's like 2 people trying to make it wealthy, or there's a problem in the village and someone is, there was this film recently about, there was a problem in a village and there was a hero that stood up against it. So those kind of narratives are still playing. It's because our film industry is very small. So maybe if they had more money, there'd be like more stories about different kind of things. But because there's such few resources, those are the stories that are being made.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Siddharth, and I'm really impressed by your work, especially of connecting children. Actually, I know one of my friends. I'm from India. He's from Lahore, and he was actually part of that. So I'm so glad to meet you today.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask this question as an audience, right? Like, there are a lot of movies which are very toxic, and they are made to inflict so much pain on your brain or your mind. Basically, like everyone's talking about that movie, that it like leaves you with a scar. Like, there's so much of
gore. It left you with a scar, but millions of other people have watched it and they've been fine.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm like too sensitive, but there's so much gore in that movie that
no, I'm just being ironic. I'm not.
Yeah, I just feel like there's. Do you think, like, as an audience, should people avoid watching hateful content, or should they just go and watch it? Because you also have to like educate other people, like why they should not watch. Like, I personally, if something is like really bad content, I don't want to waste my time. but many people are happy to like go and watch it for the entertainment.
I think it's a catch-22 situation. I would never want to self-censor anything. I think it's always important to hear all sorts of stories. But I think that if you stop putting your money at the box office and supporting those films will stop getting made. And so while I would never want to censor anybody and everyone has the free ability to tell whatever story they want and should be able to, I would say that as audiences, you have purchasing power. So if you stop going to the box, if you stop going to cinema to watch those films, then those films will not be breaking sort of box office, will not be creating those headlines, and filmmakers will think twice about it. And so I think that there is an onus on audiences as well to think about where their money is going.
Hi. Firstly, super excited to see The Mandalorian and Grogu in IMAX coming out soon. Secondly, I wanted to ask about AI in filmmaking has been a huge topic recently. We've seen tools like CGI, auto-tune in music being introduced and then sort of becoming normalized across the industry. And we're seeing more and more AI tools do more and more advanced stuff. So when that eventually inevitably becomes the baseline and everyone has access to those tools and that power, how do you think artists and filmmakers in general will be putting their own creative and unique spins on stuff, and how do you think they will differentiate themselves from the rest of the crowd that can, on the baseline, produce the same level of stuff?
I think what it's going to do is going to change Hollywood. I think that it's about time that happens, because I think that filmmakers around the world, if they've been given the same opportunity, the same platforms to create content, there'll be diversity in content, there'll be new film ideas, and that's what the film industry needs. It needs an absolute shakeup. And it needs a shakeup because you have people who hold the gates and they don't let other people in. And we need to push those gates open completely. So do I embrace AI? Absolutely. Do I think that what AI can do for countries in the cinematic South, and I say cinematic South is all those countries that aren't able to compete with Hollywood, it will allow filmmakers in those countries to be able to create films. And that is the beauty of it, because the monster's already in the building. You just have to decide how to use that monster. I mean, to sit here and say no one should use AI, well, it's already here. If I don't use it, I will become irrelevant tomorrow. The biggest problem with AI that I foresee is the way the film industry works is that you have a pipeline. You have people who come up, who get mentored, who get internships, who work on sets, who learn things, and then they graduate into bigger and bigger and bigger rooms. That pipeline will be gone because AI will be doing all the work that they would have done to get into that room. So those people who are in the room today, they'll be fine. It's about finding how the next generation is going to get into that room. But they're going to have to create their own yellow brick road in order to get into that room, not the traditional way at all. And that's what I see happening. So you'll see, probably in the next, I'd say, 3 years, you'd see a surge of films coming from countries that you would never expect it to. And you would see that the major platforms, the streaming platforms, are going to have to start paying attention to them, because they're not going to be funding those films. Suddenly they're going to have to realize that those films exist, and they have an appetite around them. They're going to have to put them on the platforms. When you have enough of those films on the platform, you change the algorithms of the platform. You change what people get to see and consume. Right now, the biggest thing is people have great ideas, but people are like, our audiences are not going to want to watch that. We don't want to fund that. We don't want to do that. And so they're being the gatekeepers. But when you blow open the gates, then there's nothing left.
Last question of the night.
Thank you. You've told some pretty groundbreaking stories and difficult ones as well, and sometimes stories that aren't popular to begin with. Have you faced backlash, and how do you deal with that kind of backlash or personal or professional threats? And what advice do you have for this room when being brave?
Sure. Very early in my life, I thought about my role. Do I want to win a popularity contest, or do I want to impact the lives of people? And I decided that winning a popularity contest was not the way I wanted to go. And so I stopped thinking about about what people say. I think about the laws that my films influence. I think about how many people see my films. I think about the mobile cinema that I've set up in Pakistan that goes from village to village, town to town, that shows work to people. I think about the educational programs I've set up. I think about the film fund that I have for women in Pakistan. I think about the artist residency that I'm building in Pakistan. And then I think about the difficult films that I've created. And I think about the women who desperately wanted their stories told and on whose testimony laws have been changed. And so if people find that difficult and they find my holding up a mirror to society difficult, then they need to fix their reflection in the mirror instead of shooting the messenger. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sharmeen.
Thank you.